That's a pretty specific title. Spotted turtles' use of mosquito control ditches in Suffolk County. This was a project that I took over from John Baylor, who a lot of you herp people would know. He was with Wildlife Conservation Society and herpetologist at the Bronx Zoo. Very, you know, probably at the international level in terms of the work he did on reptiles and amphibians. He had initiated a mark recapture study at a specific site on the east end of Long Island back in 1996. And I'll talk a little bit about, you know, what he found and you know, when I came into the scene. But basically, the study site was the wetlands were all gridded with the typical mosquito control ditches. And the study was, the project eventually became funded by the Suffolk County Department of Vector Control with Sabin Foundation. And Andy Sabin was one of the key people that started the South Fork Natural History Society and the museum out in Bridgehampton. And the New York State DEC helped out with that as well. Spotted turtles are also called the polka dot turtle. And some describe this as one of the state's most beautiful turtles. They are really pretty. They're hard to confuse with anything else. They don't all have the spots on the shell, though. They get this staining depending on the habitat they're in. That, you know, I think it's the tannins in the water. But they always have the spots you can see on the head and the tail, and they have a kind of a yellow-orange stripe along the side of the head as well. So, are they the prettiest of our turtles? Have any of you ever seen a spotted turtle in the wild? Raise your hand. Okay, fair number of you. Cool. So they're kind of yeah, they're a very pretty turtle, but I don't know if I would say they're any more pretty than our box turtle. This is a turtle at the study site, female laying eggs in June. And we heard a lot about the conservation of diamondback terrapins. I think less people encounter diamondback terrapins on land than the box turtles, but those of you that have, I mean, this is a gorgeous turtle. And to choose between just those three turtles, which is the prettiest, be like me trying to come up with what's my favorite India Pale Ale. Can't be done. It'd be a tough one. This is the distribution of spotted turtles in North America, well, in their range. So they do venture up into southern Quebec and Ontario and down into Florida, all along the seaboard here. And I was fortunate enough to run into a spotted turtle researcher that actually has studied them at the two extreme ends of their range and in between. I'll talk about her a little bit later on. A couple other things about this turtle. It has a bridge right here. It's not as domed as the box turtle, and you can sex them by the color of the beak, amongst some other things. I actually found that the shape of the plastron was the best way to sex them. Males and females have different tail length. The males have a longer tail. The males have not as brightly colored mouth area. And a different eye color. Eye color was the least reliable in my experience at the study site I was at. And then this is a male. And you can see the gray, the dull gray color here. Very docile animal, really kind of a sweet disposition. Unlike, I had a little experience helping someone out with a eastern mud turtle study, and they're really kind of, for a little turtle, they're kind of nasty, actually. And the plastrons, the bottom of the shell changes a lot as they get older. So this is a juvenile, and brightly colored like this, and that's really out of focus, but I was learning how to use the macro feature of my camera, I guess. Anyway, it gets stained like this, and as it gets older. Baylor was able to age the turtles up to about 8 or 9 years by counting the growth rings on the scutes on the top of the shell. And after that, they get so close together and they get kind of worn, and it's very difficult to age them. And if you look in the literature, they give the lifespan of this turtle as being up to about 50 years. And one of the leading researchers in North America, Jackie Litzkus, she's got some new information coming out on that. I think she's going to be pushing that up to about 100 years. And this is the kind of habitat they like. So this is it's not really a pond turtle. This is really a shallow marsh, vernal pool, swamp, emergent wetland kind of a turtle. And they use a variety of different habitats over the course of the season. So in the spring, they really hit the vernal pools. The summer, they might move into the adjacent upland forest and estivate during the really hot days. Estivating meaning it's the summer version of hibernating, so they become inactive. And they dig down under the thatch or the leaf litter to where they get a little cooler microenvironment in the forest floor, and just not move around at all for a couple days, a couple weeks, and become active again in the fall, and move to their winter areas, which are described as shallow wetlands, marshes, bogs, swamps, and they find a little niche in there that they can get in where the temperature doesn't fluctuate a lot, and they don't have to worry about freezing. Their movement in the spring into the vernal pools is to feed on, this will be their first feeding of the year after they come out of hibernation. They go after salamander eggs, spotted salamanders, wood frog. This is wood frog eggs. Wood frog eggs, tadpoles. They eat small aquatic insects and crustaceans, slugs, worms, and snails. So it's pretty much a meat diet for most of their life. And this is my study site. So this is a 40-acre area. It's a mix of woods, mostly pitch pine. You can see some open sandy areas, which I assume would be like great nesting habitat for the spotted turtle. It ends up the spotted turtle, unlike most of our turtles that gravitate towards sunny, sandy areas to dig their nests, they are known to go into the woods and dig into like a rotting stump or log and lay the eggs in more of a moist environment. But here's the classic mosquito-controlled ditches. And I'm up pretty far away from the bay where this all empties out into. And there's a road that comes across here further to the right with 2 culverts under it. So tidal flow is very restricted here. I did get some brackish water readings in part of the study area, but most of the area was the salinity readings were on the fresh side. Okay, yeah, so a couple other things about this. So that's hard to tell from here. I think I might have a, so yeah. So extensive cattail marsh. This was described as a fen by the Natural Heritage Program staff that visited the site. This is iris, let's see, this is written down, slender blue flag. I think it's iris versicolor. And a variety of sedges and rushes. And this is a classic mosquito control ditch that ditch maintenance and the original creation of the ditch many years ago created just enough of a berm on either side of the ditch with the spoils that it raised the level of the adjacent area such that groundsel bush and marsh elder, these shrubby plants moved in and colonized right along the edge of the spoils and took over from what would have been the Spartina patens or saute zone. So kind of a weird spot for spotted turtles. John Baylor, again, he started working here in 1996, and over the four field seasons between 1996 and 1999, he marked 61 individual turtles and took extensive notes on them, their condition, drew blood from some of them to do some work on that, and took some of the females in to get x-rayed. The radiograph would show, at a certain time of the year, would show how many eggs they have. And this is the way he would mark them. So starting from the head, this would be the right side of the turtle, and this is the first scute. So this would be labeled R1 as a notch. We use a little triangular file. And then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this would be R17 and L1. That would be the code. And you can mark a lot of turtles with that code because you've got a number of scutes on the left and the right side, and you can do a whole variety of different patterns. Okay. So in the winter of 1999, 2000, in that winter, vector control came through the study site in the wintertime, and they wanted to clean out the ditches. They get clogged up and there's no flow. And they changed their machinery at some point in time, and I don't know when that was, but remember I said they used to go through with it'd be more like a little snowplow, and they just pile the spoil up on the side here, and that changed the habitat from patens to groundsel bush. So they came up with this idea of this is more like a snow blower, and they broadcast the sediment and the vegetation that started growing in the ditches and blew it out over a fine spray over the marsh, so they didn't have the change in the elevation of the adjacent area. So this was considered an environmental plus, as well as the fact that they did the work in the wintertime. And so the next field season, Baylor got word from someone else that took over the mark recapture study, and they said, I can't find a lot of the turtles this year. And so he went out and noticed that one of the ditches had been cleaned out, and he surmised that they were hibernating in the ditches, and he lost like 30% of the marked animals, which is huge mortality for adult turtles. The turtles life history is such that they get a high mortality as eggs and hatchlings and a very low mortality rate naturally as they become adults. And if you really zero in and hammer the adult population with high mortality, then you eventually don't have a population. You don't have a viable breeding population. And this was a turtle that he had caught and marked. Yeah, this is R10. In 1996, he caught it, marked it. It was a 9-year-old female. And he also radiographed this, and it had 5 eggs, so it was mature. They become sexually mature at about 10 years. And this part of the plastron right here, well, it's missing a chunk. And this part was, oh, by the way, there's the R10 notch right there. This part was hanging just by a thin layer of skin. And I looked through the records, and I found that the guy that took over from Baylor in 2000, the 2000 field season, noted that this had some damage. And when I came on the scene a couple of years later, I looked at this and I said, I should take this to a vet and have him take a look at this. So the vet actually took this part of the plastron off and cauterized the skin there underneath it because I felt it was going to get hung up on something and it was going to impede its ability to move around. So an interesting story about this, in the literature, you'll note that some people claim spotted turtles have a remarkable ability to navigate and travel quite far. Most of these turtles have a very small home range, but the males will make these huge overland travels to different vernal pools or to find mates. And what happened was the vet wanted to get it back out in the field as soon as possible, and somehow the message that they needed to contact me, this turtle was part of a study. It needed to go. You generally want to release the animal where you got it anyway, but it was particularly important because it was part of my research project. That message got lost, and one of the volunteers who lived in the area where this came from said, oh, I kind of know that generally where the marsh is, and they released it at an area quite far from it. This is the radiograph of that. You can see the eggs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they released it over here, and this is where I had trapped it. So that's about 1.5 miles out of the study area. And 8 weeks later, I found out what he did. I put traps in here. I couldn't capture it, but I caught it in the same exact trap 8 weeks later. I don't know. I love turtles, and that just bumped them up in my estimation, big time. That's unbelievable. There was a lot of construction going on here, and this is a very busy road, actually, in the summertime, and this all happened in the summer. So pretty incredible. So, so Baylor had this hypothesis, and I had taken over the study, and I learned about that hypothesis, and I said, well, let's see if we can figure this out. And I said, let's do a radio-telemetry study and see where they're hibernating. You know, if they're hibernating in the ditches, and we could maybe get some changes made to the county's mosquito control program. And at the time, Dominic Ninivaggi, who a lot of you know, he's retired now from vector control, but he used to work for the DEC. He's a biologist. He was the head of vector control for Suffolk County. And he thought this was a great idea, very supportive. he funded the project, and I got a little bit of a late start by the time all the dust had settled and the contracts were signed and everything. But it wasn't until late fall that I set up my traps. These are the traps I set in the ditches. They have a funnel opening on either end where the turtles come in. I did bait the traps, but a funny thing about turtles in general, spotted turtles in particular, is when the water temperature drops below 50, these are cold-blooded animals, their digestive enzymes don't work. 50 degrees Fahrenheit or about 10 degrees centigrade. So they're really not feeding. And the way I got around that was I used these little wings so that basically, if they were moving through the ditch, they would kind of have to get out of the ditch, get around the trap, and continue on down the ditch. And I thought, well, it might increase my chances of getting enough study animals to put I wanted to get about 10% of the population. So I wanted to get at least 10 turtles, 5 females and 5 males with radio telemetry units. And we did just a simple attachment with electrical tape where it came across that bridge area where we weren't impeding the movement of the legs and the feet. So we kicked this off in November. Here's a trap set up right here, and I got those wings going off on either side. There's another wing back there. And these are my markers. So I'm a kind of a low-tech guy, as you can see from some of my slides here. So what I did was, this is the code on the radio receiver 94, and I mark it with a simple stake. And then when I come out in the winter, I relocated them twice a week. And so I would just, when I relocated it, I have this stake and then I have the next stake, and I just measure the distance in between. Pretty simple. If I use the GPS unit, it's plus or minus a couple meters. I'm not going to get the kind of, detailed results that I really wanted. And also the GPS is not going to necessarily show it the ditches are only about a foot or two wide. So anyway, that was the way I did it. And I tried to get a visual or just reach in and feel around and locate it as many times as I could. And eventually, I got what's called naturalists call a search image. So I could easily pick them out. And it took me a while to get this. It wasn't something I had right away. I remember reading through John Baylor's notes, and he would say, oh, I HC'd another 5 turtles this week. And I realized, hand captured. How did he do that? Well, that's called dirt time amongst naturalists. He had the search image. All he needed to see is, one little dot standing above, going along the ditch. Oh, there's one right there. You could also tell when they were moving, you could distinguish them from other things that might be in the water, like striped killifish. You just got that search image. And I also got to the point where I was walking along in the spring. They're very active right now. They've come out of hibernation, and they're doing the mating thing. And they'll be out basking on a day like this, and they'll bask right on the edge of the ditch. And so you're walking along, and they can sense you when you're far enough away that you can't see them. And you hear a plop. And I got to the point where that's a spotted turtle plop. I walk over, and I could find it and pick it up. So, whoops. So I also noted the vegetation and the condition of the ditch, and this is what I would I called a debris-filled ditch. And there were 2 turtles that hung around in here for 3/4 of the winter and moved just, slightly from day to day, shifting around. They were always in the upper surface of the water. They didn't burrow into the sediments. They were always within 10 inches of the water surface. Okay, so this is a female L1, R1, the winter movements between early December and early March. And she moved, the circles are when she was in a ditch, and the triangles was when she was on the edge of the ditch, outside of the ditch. She moved 240 meters over that time, but pretty much hung around in this area. So moving back and forth, back and forth. And by the way, this is, from getting once or twice weekly radio telemetry locations. So how much she moved from day to day, that's a minimum number. But the bottom line was, I found that the turtles basically didn't hibernate. Here's the winter locations, 159 total locations of 8 turtles, 4 males, 4 females. Almost 2,800 meters of travel. And 97% of the relocations were in the ditches. And I even found that a turtle that started out over here and ended up over here, instead of going across classic textbook spotted turtle marsh habitat, this is basically a fen. Well, this is a little wooded, but like from here to here is fen, and this is cattail and frag. Instead of going across like this, they would go down, around here, over, and up here. So they loved the mosquito ditches. And when I sent my report in to Dominic, he said, wow, well, let's see if we could find out when they're not in the ditches. So maybe they get out of the ditches in the spring when they're doing the mating thing, and then we can go in and clean the ditches. Oh, by the way, one other thing I should mention here is this ditch is the one that they cleaned in 1999, 2000, that winter. And they used all of these ditches, as you'll see later on over the course of the year. They never went into this clean ditch. There was no cover. They definitely didn't like that. This is a group of postdocs from Stony Brook, and this is this woman here on the far right is Jackie Litskus. She got wind of what I was doing. She is the spotted turtle expert in North America. She's the most published person. She's studied them at where she went to grad school in Georgia. She did some work in the Mid-Atlantic states. She was at Stony Brook that year that I happened to be doing this, and came out to visit my site. She now teaches at Laurentian University in Southern Ontario and is still doing spotted turtle work up there in Southern Canada. And the first thing she said to me when she got out of the car, she goes, I don't believe there's spotted turtles here. This is definitely not spotted turtle country. And, but she gave me a lot of great advice. And one thing that was really a lot of fun was, this is when, if I did this like 5 years earlier, there wouldn't have been the email connection with researchers. And when I came back from the field, from a day by myself out in the field, finding all these crazy things that I didn't quite understand, I could email Jackie, John Baylor, and Al Breich and have this really cool exchange of information and questions and answers. It was really made the study a lot more interesting. So we continued into the spring. I picked up a couple more turtles, so I bumped up my study sample. I think at this point I had 6 males and 6 females. And my spring numbers were, I started doing the relocations every other day because there was a lot more movement. They were really moving around a lot. So still, as you can see, couple, most of the non-ditch locations were right on the edge of the ditch. There were a few a ways away from the ditch, but not many. So springtime, still using the ditches. Summertime, a lot more non-ditch locations where they crawled under the salt hay thatch and just hung out there for not that long, maybe like 10 days to 14 days before they moved on. But they also crossed over into another part of the study area in the summer. But none in the clean ditch. There was not one relocation in the clean ditch. So here's a chart that shows relocations per season, total movement. Again, this is it's a little distorted because I was only doing 1 or 2 relocations per week in the winter and summer. And I was doing it every other day in the spring. So I would need to adjust that, so I'm comparing apples and apples. But there's a lot more movement in the spring. And the main thing is, though, they were always in the ditches. They never left the ditches, and they used them as travel corridors. And I didn't find any evidence of them actually hibernating. So that was useful information for vector control. And this is the year-round charting of a particular individual, L1, R1. And you can see really close to or in the ditch like 97% of the time. Now, one thing that we didn't learn about this population that I'm very curious about, be worth revisiting, is that we don't really know where their nesting areas are. And I did find one turtle. I got a call from someone. It was way down here. It was like close to 300 meters from the closest known location. 5 minutes, okay. In the study site. So this area here it gets a little more saline. They didn't mind a little bit of salinity. They didn't totally just stay in the fresh water. But as you get closer to this road, it got the salinity levels went higher. But that was a female. She was way down here. She actually got hit by a car. I had one of my transmitters on it, and we took it to the vet. It was alive, but in bad shape, and we couldn't quite save it. So I had that mortality, and I'm assuming that that female was headed to an egg-laying site. But I'm not sure about that. So that's something that we still don't know. One thing we definitely confirmed is that this was the ideal ditch habitat that they liked. So this is, I think this is Scirpus americanus and sword. Can you help me out with that? Is it swordgrass? Yeah, I think it's swordgrass. And Phragmites, swordgrass, cattail, anything with a little emergent vegetation growing in the ditch. So this is a candidate for getting cleaned out by vector control. This is really not what they want, but this is really what the turtles like. And my conclusions were that they showed a strong preference for these ditches throughout the year, and I think that the ditching actually created a little microenvironment because it intercepted the water table. And the groundwater on Long Island is a pretty constant temperature year-round, and it just created a little spot for them where they really didn't have to hibernate. it may have actually changed their behavior over a long period of time. And as I mentioned, the ditches containing emergent vegetation and various types of debris are preferred over those clean ditches. This was a real problem for vector control, which maintains the ditches. They were in the middle of doing their generic environmental impact statement regarding their maintenance procedures, and they've actually stopped doing the ditch cleaning in this particular area. And I think they've done away with that in a lot of other areas as well. And yeah, so long-term management plans for this site needs to be developed by the county, vector control in conjunction with DEC, natural heritage. This was a really neat plant from a botanical standpoint as well, and New York State parks, to prevent conflicts among mosquito control programs and rare plant management and turtle conservation. The spotted turtle is a species of special concern in New York State. And some of these I've already mentioned. Have the ditches modified turtle behavior by creating an artificial microenvironment that makes hibernation and estivation unnecessary? Interesting question. Have ditches modified turtle movements? Do turtles move in response to the salinity changes? Does that affect their movements within their home range? The other thing that was really strange was the ditches continued to the south into a cranberry bog, freshwater wetland marsh, which is classic spotted turtle habitat. I couldn't find any turtles in that area. For some reason, and I can only guess that it's related to the food resources, but I'm not really sure. They really like to be in that kind of old remnant salt marsh ditch area. The other thing I learned from this, and I think we can all take away, is basic ecological monitoring. I mean, this started out as a mark recapture study with no real significant goal, just keeping an eye on things, year-to-year monitoring of the marked turtles, and all of a sudden something happened, and we had baseline information to say, oh, a lot of turtles were lost. Maybe it's related to that ditch cleaning incident. And we never would have learned that if we didn't just set up the monitoring program. The other thing we don't know about is where are the hatchling through age 3 class turtles. I don't have none of the turtles in the traps. The hatchlings to 3-year-olds were nowhere to be found in the study area. I want to give out a special shout out to the herp guys that really helped me out. Herp people are weird people, man. I hate to say it, they're weird people. Yeah. But Andy Sabin here, when I moved here in 1988 at a graduate school, my radio telemetry experience was with elk in Banff National Park. And he got me totally hooked on turtles and salamanders, but really turtles, and funded a bunch of surveys I did. And I learned a lot from Andy. He was a great mentor. And you all know him, right? Scary guy to run into in the dark in the woods. You don't know he's there. You don't know. Now, Norm is very generous with his time. He's totally into herps and fish, and he helped me out a lot. He was a font of good information. He's at Connecticut now, working on the hatchery there, revitalizing the hatchery, and just a very generous guy with his time. Can't say enough about that. So that's it. Thank you.
Questions?
I was wondering if you noticed any adverse effects from either the radios on the back of the shells or the scoot markings, like if they deteriorated more over time or if the turtles were getting stuck in places because of the thing on their back.
Right. Yeah, good question. So I did have at the end there another thing, you know, there's always impacts to doing wildlife research when you get involved in kind of invasive stuff like that. The notches grow back over, and I was hoping to actually get permission to revisit that site before the notches grew back in, just so that we can maintain the monitoring there. But that didn't come through, so I'm not sure how long those notches will actually be discernible. I'm guessing that it would be tough to find the evidence of the notches now. In terms of the transmitters, there's some protocols where you can't put a transmitter that weighs more than 10% of the body weight of the turtle on the turtle. So I weigh 160 pounds, so that would be the equivalent of me walking around with a 16-pound pack on. And so the weight wasn't an issue. However, the antenna, the whip antenna, is about 10 inches long. And when they're crawling around in those ditches with the emergent vegetation that they really like during growing season in the summer, back and forth, eating, the antenna could get wrapped around vegetation and really slow them down. And even in a couple cases, I think that unless I had helped untangle them, I don't think they would have been able I think they would have been hung up. And so I ended up talking to the company that manufactures them, and we decided that I could clip off a lot of the antenna and still, based on, I'm walking along the ditches. I mean, I wasn't like I was a mile away, like maybe the bat study, you know. I was close enough that I didn't need the 10-inch antenna, so that's what I did. But yeah, that's a definite concern.
And then just on the same note, the turtle that you had the bottom removed because it was hanging by the skin, did you notice during your tracking that the turtle had any open to predation because it was missing the bottom and it like couldn't close up or anything like that?
No, I continued to capture that turtle for the duration of the study and track it. No, I think that was a help, if anything, but I can't say for sure. The other thing is, when you're, you know, quite a large number of spotted turtles, you know, maybe like 5% of them are missing like a piece of their tail, missing a foot, but they heal over and they still manage to survive. So I don't know that there's any predation on them there, but I'm assuming that that's like snapping turtles that are in the study area. Possibly raccoons.
Yeah.
The raccoon would probably
Right.
do them in, actually,
Yeah.
if the raccoon got hold of them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, thanks. When I was a little younger, I volunteered with Norm. I think I wore that same blue device around my neck, and a similar protocol to yours, it looks like, in Flanders area. And I noticed, I never forget, one day he saw this mud turtle somehow, or maybe it was the plop, and he ran over to this little depression in a salt marsh and reached down and just felt around and pulled up this mud turtle, and I was mesmerized by that. I was a teenager. But I just wanted to ask you if you have, like I had checked similar looking traps, you know, every couple of days, and some areas were tidal, and you know, you'd have to make sure the trap was set above
Yeah.
high tide, and
Yeah.
but we had bycatch of other species. I was wondering if you could share about what bycatch or other animals you trapped. He was using anchovies at the time in a can. Mm-hmm. I was wondering what you, in the Napeague area, if you could just share some of your other items that you caught.
I caught some eels and some small, not too many, you know, the opening in the trap is pretty small, so I caught some very small snapping turtles. But an interesting thing about the trap is the turtles, you know, we forget they're animals. Animals have a brain. Even though it's just a turtle, they learn over time. They learned how to push aside my one-way gate. So I thought once they were in, once they pushed the gate up and got in the funnel, through the funnel and into the trap, that they would hit the one-way gate and not get out. But they, just like they navigate through the Phragmites thicket in the ditch, they turn sideways and they just push the gate aside a little bit and they'd slip out. And because I had the radio telemetry equipment on them, I knew sometimes I'd see one, like, all right, there's one in there, I'll come back and get that later. Like, it's getting late, I got to go check on this other one further away. I come back, it's gone. You know, they would figure out ways to get around anything I came up with. So that was kind of interesting. The other thing I didn't mention in the beginning, you know, this really shocked me. Spotted turtles were before the 1900s. There's some naturalist quotes on this. The quote was, they rivaled the painted turtle in terms of their abundance on Long Island. They were a very common turtle. And nowadays, boy, there are not many places where you can find them. And the big impact has been the collectors. So, by the way, anyone has any ideas about collecting spotted turtles at this site, I include the conservation officer to stop any suspicious cars that are parked along the roadbed. Yeah, they don't even think about it. But some guy went into a site off of the Bottini River, and he's a retired New York City cop, wiped out the whole population. I think it was over 100 turtles, according to Norm. Yeah, that's really, I just can't believe that this day and age that happens. But
you know, you talked about the site in Napeague. How many other sites are there on the east end of Long Island where spotted turtles are found? I know they're very uncommon.
They're in Montauk, so further east, right out at the Montauk Point State Park. Matter of fact, I found my only hatchling spotted turtle while I was leading a seal walk. This time of the year, it was late March, and the hatchling, you could still see the yolk sac scar. So it had hatched the previous fall, but never came out of the nesting site. They do that sometimes. They just stay in the nest. It's a good overwintering site, and they emerge in the spring. So they're out all the way to the end of the island, and I did, Dominic Ninavaji was interested in knowing if this was an aberration, and I had several other ditched wetlands in East Hampton and Southampton that I checked. And yeah, they were in other places as well.
Do you think they're in the Bottini River system someplace?
They were, and I would be surprised if there weren't some left in some of those areas. Huh? There are some.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thanks everyone.
All right, thanks, Mike.